Talk Show.
이 프로그램은 단지 2세, 3세들을 위한 프로그램입니다.
This program is for the next generation and the third generation after.
이 프로그램은 그래서 우리들만의 프로그램이 아니라
We pray that this program is not just for us.
언제든지 문이 열려 있기 때문에 어느 교회가 아니면 어느 단체가 함께해도 좋을 프로그램입니다.
We would love for any church or organization to join and participate with us.
특별히 이것을 위해서 우리가 선 미디어 시스템에 함께 하셨고요.
It's made possible through the partnership with Sun Media Systems.
저희 교회가 항상 주최를 하지만 언제든지 다른 교회나 단체들이 원하시면 함께 할 수 있는 프로그램입니다.
We're always open to have other churches join us and help us.
오늘 너무나도 바쁘신데도 와주신 우리 데이비드 문 하원 의원이시지만 굉장히 영향력 있는 2세 모시겠습니다. 함께 축복해 주시고 박수해 주시기 바랍니다.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you for having me. It's not often actually that I get to speak for an audience like this, so it really is a generational discussion, and we're going to get a little bit into it. So I am DavidMoon. I'm currently serving as the majority leader in the Maryland House of Delegates. So that is the state legislature in Maryland. It's 141 members, and I've been there for 11 years. That in itself is totally wild and improbable and unexpected. But for me to be the majority leader, it's really crazy, unexpected, and wild. And because I want to talk a little bit about my experience as a child of immigrants in particular, I think many of you might understand why it feels particularly unpredictable and wild for me in particular to be currently serving as the House Majority Leader. So I'll try and start at the beginning. I was born and raised in Maryland. I actually live about a couple blocks really from the hospital that I was born in Tacoma Park. But my parents were immigrants from Korea. Much like many first generation immigrants here in the United States. This story is going to sound totally the same for so many people. They came over after the war, they met here, and they set up a life in Maryland and tried to build wealth, get education for their kids, and push them. So that's the upbringing that I came up with. But why is it improbable in a turn? Well, I became really captivated by U.S. education and history about things like civil rights. And these were, real big elements of what we were learning about in this new country. The struggles for civil rights, voting rights, and things like that. And it really captured my imagination. These were the things I wanted to work on by the time I got to college. And my parents, like many parents, were intent. They took lots of risks in coming here. They didn't know this country, and they spent a lot of time and hours to build opportunities for us. And at the time, doctor and lawyer were the most suitable professions. And the parents of my family members in later generations, their parents would add computer science, engineering, and maybe banking also to the professions that they were trying to push their kids into. So you can imagine my mother's dismay when she found me doing a lot of activism in college, and I did ultimately run for student senate and become the student president in college. But by the time 4 years was over, I wanted to get a PhD in sociology and work on justice work. And my mother was very opposed to this concept and was trying to push my eye back towards law. She said, you don't like blood. You're scared of blood. So the law might be good for you. And you know, I ended up caving. So I went straight into law school, but I was intent to do it the way I wanted to do it. And so, you know, the advice for people who wanted to be serious lawyers if you went to law school was you go to the law journal, you participate in moot court, then you get a clerkship, you try to get a job at a law firm in your second year. There's a very specific path, and I did none of those things. Instead, I volunteered for the clinic that served poor women that needed representation for things like healthcare and housing. And I went and I investigated cases for people in prison who were saying they were innocent and they wanted their DNA tested. And I say all this to say I don't have a lesson for you that you can take. I can just tell you what my own path looked like. And it was a little bit of honoring my parents' expectations and understanding the sacrifice they had made, but really finding my own voice and finding what I needed to do to fulfill the sort of goals that I was trying to achieve myself. So, all right, we get out of that. Now I've got a law degree, I'm out in the world, I'm at a voting rights and election reform world, so I stayed true to my vision to use my law degree in this manner. But I started getting pulled more and more into politics. And here we saw another interesting generational discussion happening. My mother found this very strange. What are you doing? What are you getting involved in all of this? And my dad would see the activism side of it and say, I don't think this is a good idea. I don't think you should get involved in all of this. And they really thought I should segue into government employment. You know, and a lot of this I've later learned is fed by, you know, what Korean society versus American culture, how one views different professions changes totally by different cultures. And so they found my work in politics very strange, but I stuck with it. And, you know, every year from college to law school, I interned at a different organization. I didn't want to specialize. I wanted to learn everything. So one year it was voting rights, another year it was death penalty, another year it was women's rights, and I just kept learning. But the thing that stands out, and I really have to be honest about this because it didn't occur to me until now, lots of things I didn't think about until now. But in 90s, when I did my first internship in Washington, D.C., my boss said, you're really interested in politics. When are you going to run for office? Have you thought about it? And I said, no way. If you look at elected life around here, everybody is black or white, and we are such a small percentage of the population, I don't think anybody's going to vote for me. I don't think this is possible. And when I looked at all of the US Congress and the history of politicians, the Asians were only in like Alaska, Hawaii, California, where they actually had, you know, substantial voting populations. So again, I grew up thinking this is not possible. So as I did all of this work over the years, I was convinced I would be working for other people, and I was fine with that. That was my view of the world, and I told this to my internship supervisor. She didn't think it was right. So what changed? Well, you know, I grew up in Montgomery County, and they used to say, the county's changing, it's becoming more diverse. It's becoming majority-minority. And as a child, I didn't believe it. You know, I grew up in Bethesda, actually, so my parents eventually moved from the Langley Crossroads area out to Bethesda. My experience growing up was being one or two Asian people in most of the classes and spaces, certainly not a majority population. Now, I'm presently standing in Howard County, so this might be different in parts of Howard County. But again, where I grew up wasn't the case. The numbers felt very small. And years later, when the whole Asian hate discussion came up, a couple years ago, it came back to me like a wave of bricks, remembering there was 2 or 3 Asian households in the neighborhood, the little neighborhood I grew up in Bethesda, but there was graffiti one day when we came home to our neighborhood outside of one of the houses. I don't remember what it said. Go home, something like this. Very obviously targeting the fact that these were people not from this country. And my parents didn't say anything. We just sort of drove by, and we never discussed it. This was not something we discussed. We just sort of passed by it in shock and went home. And I didn't think about it again until decades later, when this whole Asian hate discussion came up. So again, to be very clear, me and politics was not something I ever envisioned myself doing, and everything about feeling, growing up in this area, felt like I was sort of had a foot in different worlds, and not many other people had the same 2 worlds that I was experiencing. So hopefully this is something many of you are familiar with these dynamics. So what changed? Well, I started volunteering and working for campaigns. Nobody asked me to. And again, at the time, you did not see very many Asian young people volunteering for political campaigns, interning. They certainly weren't staffing them, and you didn't see them in the offices of people. That's very different today. So you can feel encouraged that has changed. But again, when I was coming up, wasn't the case. Found myself usually the only Asian person in the sea of political operatives out there. But finally, I had a candidate who was a Venezuelan immigrant herself. She was on the school board in Montgomery County at the time, and she ran for county council. And she ran against the son of the former county executive, and she won, just by a little bit, but she won. And many political observers in the county started to think, aha, this is where we're beginning to see that when they used to say Montgomery County is eventually headed towards a minority county, we start to see the voting behavior becoming more open to a wide range of candidates. And at the time, we maybe only had 1 or 2 black elected officials from the county in a large period of time. So again, when I grew up, it was the exception, not the rule. And when you look today, it is very different. You have people of all different backgrounds that are running and winning. But it wouldn't have been enough just for it to be the case that, the numbers have changed. There's a lot more diverse people in Maryland, in the US, on the East Coast. Now everything should be fine. Everyone should win. Remember, I said, you don't see, at least you didn't in the time I was there, very many young Asians staffing, interning, and working for campaigns. And so part of the reason I think it was possible for me not just to do it, but to feel that I was capable of running for office myself was because I had started working on campaigns. And it was totally demystified for me. I knew exactly what it took, what you had, how much money you had to raise, what your days would have to look like if you undertook that. And so by the time an open seat opportunity emerged for me, I said, I can do this. After years of feeling like I can't do this, I felt like I can do this. And so what's the lesson at this stage of the game? Nobody's inviting you to the table. You invite yourself. You show up. You try and get in there. And again, thankfully, we had some trailblazers before me, and we had the Susan Lees, the Kumar Barves in my own county, who were showing that it was possible. But today, to get to today, where the numbers expand, and hopefully we start to see participation at more robust levels, that's the next generation's challenge. So I'll close it with one sort of final thought about this. How do you pay it forward? How does all of this immigrant experience, the Asian experience, play out in what I do, other than coming and talking to young people and trying to tell you can do it, and and giving you a taste of how I got there. How does it play out? Well, I don't know what your families are like or what your households are like, but in my family, we didn't really talk about politics. It wasn't something we talked about at the dinner table or anything like that. I actually went into life not knowing really much about my parents' very specific political views on issues or anything like that. Maybe I would find out who they liked for president or something like that, but their actual views, didn't really know much about it, and certainly not as I was growing up. So finally, here I am all these years later. My parents finally, he got into office. Now they're in favor. They like this profession now. It seems good. They're paying attention more. They're paying attention more to politics. And out of the blue, years later, as I'm starting office, my dad starts talking about the Syrian refugee crisis that was there at the time. Because this was something that was happening when I first started office. And he said, "This is horrible, what's going on?" And he said he had similar experiences as a child in Korea. And so the imagery he was seeing in the news and the experiences he was reading about and the sort of displacement of people actually hit him. And this was the only thing he ever talked to me about ever in like all of our discussions as me as a political official. And in fact, the part of the country that he started his life in the United States, the Langley Crossroads region in Maryland, that's in my district. And today, it is the entry point for people from El Salvador, Ethiopia, and a number of African countries. And so when I see these people targeted in the news, I see my parents. This is literally the exact same route, the same place they started their country in. And here's my dad talking about the Syrian refugees and his own life growing up, which, mind you, I've only learned about now, way, way later. The most vivid memories he has are about this displacement, being separated from his family, and what that was like, having to find some family members back in Korea, and then eventually coming over here. Again, I didn't learn about any of this until much more recently, and so it is absolutely at the front of my mind as we think about things like Ukraine, and today we actually sit here on the day of the No Kings rally. And one of the other experiences my father started telling me about late in life, some of the memories that stand out in his mind still to this day, is life under Japanese rule, having a Japanese name, being forced to learn the language and things of that nature. Never heard anything about this, growing up ever in my life until much, much, much more recently. And so again, I say here, at the stages of this, going to law school versus going to sociology, we had a little bit of negotiation with my family perspective and values and what I was trying to do. At the next stage of things, I found myself having goals in life and perspectives, but feeling like what I saw out there was what was possible for me, and needing to have to break in to some spaces a little bit more. And now, finally standing here, having got to an interesting place to do things, trying to pay respects to my family's journey, that I see that journey being maligned and assaulted in public discussions for many other people who are facing the same thing. So thank you for having me and spending a few minutes to hear about my personal journey. I can't tell you it's advice or a model for anybody else, but it is just how I reflect on today, how I feel about how I got here and sort of what it means with a little bit more perspective. So thank you.
자연스럽게 질문할 수 있으면 캡션 한번 해도 좋을 것 같아요.
Questions?
Hi. So I'm just turned 21 this year. Now I just being like adult to work right now. So since I work into this world, I feels like kind of lost. A lot of responsibility, a lot of like goals, a lot of things I want to do, but sometimes I don't have that ability to reach out my goal. So do you have any advice for the young adult like me or my generations, like how to find your own path or own goals?
So, it's cheesy, but they always say be willing to take risks. And part of it too is, and not everyone can do this because not everyone has the same free time. So I acknowledge, depending on what your work schedule is like, but you will be surprised how many people out there are willing to help people who want to be exposed to new fields or see other areas of work. It's a little bit of a trick knowing who those people are and how to get in touch with them, but they are out there. And so certainly, the way I talk about this, it sounds like, oh, I decided to jump into politics and that was that. No. There were many people who opened doors along the way. And a lot of a function of that was simply getting out there and networking and going to events and being in the places where these kinds of conversations are happening. You won't know these people. You don't know who you don't know until you get out there, right? So you have to get out into the spaces. So that's definitely part of it. And certainly, politics in some ways, it's a little bit of a great equalizer in this country in a very basic sense. I do think aspects of it are a meritocracy, like the system appreciates people with skill, knowledge, or have some other value. But in terms of other things, you have people in office who graduate high school, didn't graduate high school, they have a professional degree. They come from all walks of life. And in the campaign world, there's not really the degree for campaign management that makes someone, the expert on that. That's generally not how it works. Those people, even at the top of their game, people running presidential campaigns and what have you, their backgrounds are all over the place. So people at the top of the profession have totally different backgrounds. But I do think the key to it for 90% of the people is you have to start somewhere in the system. I remember in law school, I was very privileged that Bill Clinton's first campaign manager came to speak to us. And, he's a controversial figure, so say what you will about him. But he got Bill Clinton elected. And I remember he was talking to law students, mind you, and people were asking same questions like, how do I get involved in this and that? How do I break in? And he said, hey, just show up for a campaign and you tell them, I'll do whatever you need. You need me to go get the laundry, you need me to drive someone there or drop something there, I'll do it. But the first job that comes up, if I'm doing a good job, you gotta keep me in mind for that. And this was his advice for law students, who wanted to get involved in politics. And there's some truth to it because there's so much real work to do on campaigns. Someone will be doing that stuff, but mostly you won't be doing that kind of stuff. But again, you're not going to know who you don't know unless you're starting somewhere in that system, and you're not going to know what skills you don't have that you might want to develop if you're not in that system either. I'm constantly having to learn new things, and I force myself to do it, unfortunately. But in the old days, when I wanted to just do campaign management, I wanted to have at least a little familiarity with it, but it got into like learning basic computer programming, learning graphic design skills, learning how to target direct mail, learning how to do TV spot production purchases, all sorts of skills. You'd be surprised how far you can take this thing. And we got to the point today where I'm talking to people out there and I tell them about a problem I'm having. They said, oh, that's fine. You need to use an AI chatbot. I said, huh? What? And I'm like, oh man, I don't know this one, and it's something I have to learn it. So it's on my list to learn this because there's certain research that I need to do that's going to take me hours, I've been told, whereas a bot can do this thing in 5 seconds. So I'm constantly having to learn, even to stay afloat in my own current job. And I think that's, so taking risks, sort of trying to crack into the space that you're trying to get into in some way, and then learning and harnessing the relevant skills. This all seems like obvious stuff, but it's a little bit more deliberate than you would think. Like I tried to deliberately learn new stuff. Like right now, actually, believe it or not, I'm on a new project, and one of its main components is like this show that we're on. It's producing a multi-episode kind of series, and that's not something I've done before. But that's why I was excited to take this project on, because I like to do new skills, and to add production work to my skill set seems pretty cool.
Thank you.
Maybe one more, two more questions?
Sure.
Yeah.
예.
Coming through. Oh.
My question is, what ways can kids and teens help their communities, and even if we're not old enough to vote yet?
Gosh, there's countless ways. I mean, look, there's I don't want to point anyone towards a specific type of volunteerism or outreach, but one of my worries when I read about young people and screen time and social media socialization and all of this stuff is wondering about how much face-to-face interaction is happening in the world these days, how much neighborhood gatherings are happening. When my parents used to get together for my childhood, I remember sitting in basements of other Korean families eating meals with the kids at celebrations and things like that. And believe it or not, these sort of informal spaces, they're important. And I do worry that they're lacking. So I think, it could be a political campaign, it could be volunteering for a shelter or planting trees. I mean, we have regular groups actually that do yard cleanup, or they do the creek cleanup out in the neighborhood where I live. But this sort of very local stuff, I think it builds a solid foundation for all of the rest of it. And I did do this kind of stuff growing up. I have to admit, some of it was probably forced on me. Like there was requirements in school that we do this kind of community service hours. But once I was forced to do it, I actually enjoyed it. I found myself enjoying sitting there, whatever it was, distributing food was usually the one I was involved in, but I found it to be very fulfilling and engaging work. I sort of fell away from it, honestly, when I started working really heavily, but in my current job, as a legislator, we get invited back to things like that, food delivery and food preparation lines and things like this. And I'm really glad to be invited again to do it. But without the invitation, I would highly encourage you really to get involved in your own neighborhood. Again, this feels like one of the things that's possibly slipping away in a lot of the sort of culture that we're currently in.
Next question.
Thank you.
예.
How do you decide which problems to work on first?
So there's two sets of problems that I look at: big problems and immediate problems. And the big problems, for example, immigration, say. This is a multi-year discussion in Maryland, a multi-year discussion in the country. There's two sides on it. And something like that, it's just you're staking out principles, and every year you're sort of working it out through the discussion. That you can't help, right? That's coming at you no matter what. There's big problems that I choose to tackle, however, and that's really one of the joys of this job, is that I at this stage of the game, I do get to choose what bills I'm going to introduce. It's a totally open platform. You're limited by practicality. You're probably not going to introduce more than 20. So there's 20 topics you might touch out in the world in a given legislative session. But in recent years, I'm looking at housing. Why? Because I try to be a responsible elected official. I read the news along with everybody else. I'm very familiar with what's going on. It's very difficult to buy a house right now. You can't get a good interest rate. If you're renting, rents have gone up quite a bit in the last few years. It's competitive. The sales prices are crazy. I think the median price in my county now is like $700,000 or something like that. So there's many houses that cost more than that. And so again, I worry about the next generation. can young people afford to live in these places? Are they ever going to be able to afford a home? And consistently, things like this are polling. So again, it's difficult. It's not easy to just make that change, but I've been convinced that we need to build a lot more housing everywhere. And so I just dig in. They invite the majority leader every year to come talk about what you think is going on, the preview the year, and I go in and I make my notes and I try to convince everyone that's listening that we have a problem and we need to make this a priority to build more housing. And then I'll introduce test bills to try and keep bringing the topic up over and over again and hope that it takes hold. Outside of that, it's a lot of what's coming up in the minute. And so right now we have a lot of discussions, for example, around immigration enforcement with people not wearing or hiding their identity. And so you can't tell how accountable they can be if they happen to break the rule or the law or due process or something like this. And so a lot of my colleagues are coming with proposals like this, right? This is something that's happening today. Someone wants to solve it, or it might be something much smaller, not a huge topic like immigration. We have a constituent who, I had someone actually who came forward and they pointed out that the laws had changed and their son was in prison for mandatory minimum 20 years, but the laws had reformed and we had locked him up and thrown away the key and left him, even though the sentence today was much shorter for what that behavior is. So you might get someone like that trying to help their family member, and we'll put in a law, just a very narrow change to the law to clarify something that happened. So it's like mega social work in a certain sense. Someone comes forward, there's a problem in law that only we can help them. Otherwise, someone's sitting in prison for 15 extra years, right? Then I'll take a look at that and I'll get to work. I actually had exactly that scenario. There was wasn't one, there might have been eight people in prison for decades when the law had changed and actually everybody else was just going away with a little bit of time and the family members were coming forward, can you help us? It took 3 years to change that law, but we did it just to help a few people. The other one that comes to mind is we had foster youths who were severely developmentally disabled. So foster, they're wards of the state. The state is their parents. And they were getting cut off from their health care. And they literally were going to die. These are people who are hooked to machines all day. And no one was out looking after them. They came to us and they said, please, you have to help us. And we changed the law just for a very small number of people. But that's actually some of the most important work we did, is this, very immediate, trying to stop an immediate problem that's happening and help some very specific set of people that need help.
Maybe last one.
Yeah.
Jason.
Jason,
They prepare so many.
So what's your main strategy for convincing a bunch of people at once, or persuading them in whatever you're trying to do?
Oh gosh, there's not one strategy, to be perfectly honest. And if you're talking about persuading the Maryland public at large versus persuading my colleagues in the legislature, those are two different things. But by and large, I think the Maryland public tends to land in a sensible place on policy. And so it's really up to us to write sensible policy. If we did it wrong, we hear from people. They react if they really feel we went off base with something. But that's the trick of it. But in reality, this is the art of the game. It's 50 different tactics on a different day to make your case. It's obviously, but it all starts with, right, having the policy actually be sound. I don't want to discount that. That is the most important thing. If you want to win your policy, write a good policy first, right? And believe it or not, I don't believe all policy starts good. I see a lot of proposals come in, I'm like, that's crazy, or that's a horrible idea. We're not doing that. So you start with good policy, And that's a lot of just homework. You know, so bill drafting opens in Maryland every July. I can start sending the drafting team ideas for what I want to work on. So every year, in July, we send the ideas over. But as soon as July hits, I have a Google Doc that's set up for 2026 and 2027. And as I go about the world, I read a newspaper article and say, ooh, that sounds bad. I put it on the list. And we start researching all of these things that happened in the year, problems. And we start thinking about ways that we can help these people. And we do that over the course of the year. We're doing research. And then when bill drafting opens in July, we go through and we pick the most clear ideas where we can help. And we narrow the list to the ones we're actually going to work on. So everything starts with actually having a good concept that you're trying to sell. Now, assuming you did all that and you're in a good place, there's any number of things that have to go into it. But these days, you have groups that you need to dial in, make sure they understand and are ready to support your proposal, and really from a wide range of tactics. And not for nothing, but I do try to keep very good relations on both sides of the aisle so that I can have an honest conversation with my colleagues from any part of the state, from both parties, any party, and to be honest when we disagree about something, and to be very honest in the data I present and the arguments I make, so that they actually have my trust that I'm not a dishonest person. Again, even if we disagree, that they know I can come to them and say, listen, I want to explain to you this bill that we're about to vote on. I think it's a good bill, here's why. You might disagree, but you start with trust there. So start with a solid product, actually do the homework and research behind it. You know, you have an outreach plan, but fundamentally you also personally have trust and credibility as a messenger for that policy. Yes, thank you so much.
잠깐 우리 마무리 클로징 이제 기도하고 마칩시다. 오늘 귀한 발걸음을 해주시고 우리들의 다음 세대에게 도전과 응원의 말씀 들려주신 것 너무나 감사합니다.
Dear Lord, thank you for this advice that you have brought for the next generation.
앞으로 저희들은 데이비드 문 위원님이 더 큰 리더십을 가지고
We pray that DavidMoon continues to have greater and greater leadership opportunities,
더 큰 일을 감당하는 리더가 되도록
and that he is put in charge of more things.
저희들 함께 기도하며 응원하겠습니다.
We pray and are rooting for him.
하나님께서 모든 것 축복하여 주시옵소서.
Please bless everything he does.
감사하며 예수님의 이름으로
In
기도하옵나이다.
Jesus' name we pray.
아멘.
Amen.